Welcome to another Take Two with Therese. I have some mixed media inks to share with you, along with a few tips and tricks along the way. So today we're going to be making two cards using the new mixed media inks from Altenew. They come in two family groups that we already know and love. So it's the Red Cosmos and the Green Fields set of inks. So these mixed media inks are water-based and can be used on any variety of porous surfaces such as paper, fabric, wood and more. It becomes permanent once heat set with a heat gun or iron, and if you're using fabric, make sure to use an additional cloth between the iron and your project. They are both acid-free and archival. Other than the Obsidian ink, this is really the first set of pigment inks that Altenew have. So these colours, you can actually tell by the pad exactly what the colour is going to look like. I'm stamping out the Build-A-Flower Japanese Mum here at the moment, and you can see I'm using the Frayed green. These pads are a foam pad, so you don't want to sort of add too much ink. You need to tap the pad to the stamp. And a great thing with the Misty is you can add a really good amount of pressure without over pressing with the Misty. If you are using a block, just make sure not to press too hard. I'm only going to do 2 layers of this Japanese Mum. It's actually a 5 layer, 4, I don't know. Anyway, I'm only doing 2. I'm doing the base color layer and then the next layer after that. The second layer here I'm doing with the Forest Glades ink. And it is a little bit difficult to line up this stamp, so I did have to refer to the packaging. If I follow the lines on the packaging, I find that it works well. I do like to stamp out a couple of images at the same time because that saves me having to reline things up. And look at how beautifully and crisp these pigment inks stamp. They really do. On, shall I say, normal, in inverted commas, cardstock, you get the most amazing coverage. And one of the things to be aware of with pigment inks is they actually sit on top of the paper. A dye ink, so I like to think of it, a dye ink dyes the paper. So the pigment ink takes longer to dry, and I'm going to use that to my advantage here. What I've done is I've got the Trellis Stencil taped over some pale grey cardstock here, and I'm simply smushing the Forest Glades ink pad directly through the stencil. So when I think I've got enough coverage there, I know this is not going to dry too quickly, then I can actually use my translucent pearl embossing powder to add a kind of glimmery effect to this. Now if I was stamping coloured cardstock with a dye ink, it really changes the colour of the dye ink, and often you can't even see a dye ink if it's either the cardstock's too dark or the ink's too light. The good thing about pigment inks is they actually sit on top of the cardstock, so you can actually see these colours. And because they're pigment and slower drying, then I can actually add my embossing powders to them and get a really cool effect. Alright, so I have this border frame, cel-shade frame, with the rounded rectangles cut out of it. This is something I'd already created for another project and forgot to put the acetate in because it was meant to be a shaker. So anyway, I'm using it today to create a border over my trellis background. I'm going to add both of my Japanese Mum flowers. I'm popping them up on the center here and adding a couple of leaves. Now these leaves are from the Hanging Garden dies, and they're actually the negative die cut space. So both my cards today have sort of a negative die cut feature, like the main images are actually in a negative die cut space. So as well as being a focus on mixed media ink, I also have that in common. I have the sentiment, which is from the Bold Sentiments die, and oh no, it's the Bold Greetings die set, and I'm just popping that up in the bottom of the card. Onto my second card now, and I've got another builder flower set I'm using here. But this time I'm actually going to be stamping on some acetate. I'm lying again. I'm stamping on some vellum. I just can't stop myself today. I keep saying the wrong things. Okay, so I'm stamping on vellum. Another good thing about pigment inks is that if you heat set them, then they become permanent. I'm using both of these poppies out of the set, and I'm not using the outline, I'm just using the base layer and then the shadow layer. So started with the Frosty pink, flipped my vellum around, and now I've gone to the coral berry. This coral berry is such a beautiful colour, and I'm stamping both the base colours in these, and that way it gives me options. I'm not really sure what I want to do with this card yet. And so I thought, if I'm making 2 flowers, I might as well make 4 flowers. So after I've done the first base layer, then I can simply just line up the shadow layer of my stamps. I know this isn't quite dry because I haven't heat set it, so I am using my lighter one here because you're really not going to notice that too much. But I lined up that second base layer, and then I'm coming in with the next deeper colour. So on the lighter pink flower, I'm using the coral berry, and on the darker one, I'm using the ruby red. So these pigment inks are a water-based ink and can be used for so many different techniques, and it's great that they can be permanent once you heat set them. So a couple of ideas: you can watercolor with them and layer stamp like I've already done. They're really good for mixed media, and also you can stamp on wood. And if you come back later in the week, you might even see just a little bit of that here. Alright, so I did end up stamping out a couple of little bits just using my block here. I found it just easier than trying to line up the stamp, because I mean I could have heat set the images and then done this, but I didn't want to heat set them yet because I want to emboss them. And this is the beauty of these pigment inks, is that they stay wet until they're heat set. So I'm actually just using the crystal clear embossing powder this time. I didn't want the glittery one, and I just came in with my heat tool. Oh, it was attached. It had picked up one of my creative corners there. So with the heat tool, you don't want to get your heat tool too hot. So if you have a dual setting like I did do mine on the low setting, and it just took me a little bit longer. If you only have one heat setting on your heat tool, then don't point the heat gun at the image in one spot for too long. Move it round, and you can always come back once it's heated up and melted the embossing powder. But I just love the way that gives that little glossy effect. And of course this is a builder flower set, this poppy set, so it has the coordinating dies. Now I've created another negative frame again, and this time I've used some of the Essentials paper pack cardstock, and I've used one of the nesting labels dies to cut out a window. I'm adding a sentiment. This is from the Painter Flower Anemone set, and I'm stamping that with some Obsidian ink. Now, to be honest, I'm not going to give up my Obsidian ink for my sentiments. I love it. This pigment ink is awesome. And the jet black pigment ink, the mixed media ink, I could have used that. It would have worked perfectly. But I love my Obsidian. I added some ink sprays with the jet black ink spray there, and I have done that on a piece of separate, like this is just some Nina 80-pound cardstock, because I know that that ink splatter shows through on the other side of my cardstock, and I don't want that to be on the inside of my card. I've added some fun foam and some score tape to pop up my frame, and then I can just pop my flowers, or one of my flowers in place, and line up the frame. I just thought it was easier to do it this way than to try and stamp on the front of the card and make sure it was going to be in the right space. This is kind of really cheats way of doing things, but I like that. And I can just add some glue tape and pop that up on the front of my side fold landscape card. I did use a couple of foam squares behind these flowers, and I actually added a couple of leaves. These are also from the Hanging Garden set, but this time I die cut them in some jet black cardstock. And then I did try the dotted tape behind the vellum flower, but you could really see the dots. If you've got some vellum adhesive, that would be awesome, but I'm sure I have some somewhere, I just don't know where it is. So I just used some score tape here to hold that in place, and that I know is going to hold it really well. And then I can just add some foam squares behind these flowers underneath a couple of layers where possible, so that they won't be seen. And then I brought in some green Fields enamel dots and just added a couple of the black enamel dots, just because it kind of, when I did the splatters, it missed that whole area there, and these add just a little something something. So I'm going to list everything that I've used at the blog, and the link will be in the description below. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you haven't already, it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel and click on the thumbs up button if you did enjoy today's video. Till next time, bye.
Hello crafters, Jen here. For more tips, techniques, tutorials, and to discover which paper crafting products are right for you, subscribe to Altenew's YouTube channel. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Thanks for watching.